The first time my mother saw my name on the deed, she actually laughed. It was this sharp, nervous little sound, like the world had cracked open under her feet and her brain had decided the only safe thing to do was pretend it had not. We were standing in the driveway of the house I grew up in. The house my parents had spent 10 years calling their pride and joy, the house with the stone columns and the wide front porch and the marble floors my mother loved to brag about to every cousin, neighbor, and church friend who would listen. The house they swore was proof that our family had made it. There were moving boxes stacked by the garage. My father was outside in his good shoes, his face already red even though it was still early. My brother, Evan, was pacing like an angry teenager instead of a 30-year-old man with a thinning hairline and a failing business. And my mother was holding a folded set of papers with both hands like she was afraid they might vanish if she let go. She looked at me, then at the papers, then back at me. "This has to be a mistake," she said. I remember the exact moment her voice changed. It went from smug confusion to panic in about 2 seconds flat. The paper she was holding was the official notice. The one that said the new owner of the property had approved the final terms. The one with the signature line. The one with my company name on it. Not my old name. Not the name they had mocked for years. Not the name they had once said would never matter. Mine. My mother stared at the page again, and then she whispered, "No, no, this can't be right." My father snatched it from her hands so hard the paper bent. He read the top line once, then again, then his mouth opened, but nothing came out. His face went pale in a way I had never seen before. And Evan, who had spent most of his adult life acting like he was born to win while I was born to disappoint, gave a short, ugly laugh. "Okay," he said, trying to sound calm and failing. "This is funny. Very funny. But who the hell is this woman?" I looked at all three of them, and for 1 second, the whole street seemed to go quiet. The trees, the mailboxes, the distant hum of traffic, even the birds sounded far away. Then I said, "It's me." My mother blinked. "What?" "It's my company," I said. "It's my signature. And the house is mine." That was when she dropped the papers. Not dramatically. Not in some cinematic slow motion the way people imagine. Just a simple, stunned release. The pages fluttered to the pavement and landed near her shoe. She stared at me like I had just admitted to being someone she had prayed would never return. My father took 1 step forward. "Don't play games, Mia." I smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. "I'm not playing games. I bought the house." He shook his head once, hard. "From who?" "The bank." He kept staring at me, like if he looked long enough, the answer might change into something easier for him to understand. But it didn't. So I said the part they hated most. "I bought your house, Dad. The one you said I would never amount to enough to even clean." And just like that, all 10 years of silence, all 10 years of being the family disappointment, all 10 years of every cutting remark and every slammed door, and every birthday I spent watching them celebrate Evan like he was a prince and me like I was a mistake, rushed back into the space between us. My mother made a little choking sound. Evan's jaw tightened. My father stared at me with a look I had only seen on his face twice in my life. The first time was when he found out his own father had left the farm to his sister instead of him. The second time was now. I wish I could say I felt triumph in that moment. I wish I could say I enjoyed seeing them lose their footing. But the truth is, I felt something much quieter. I felt vindicated. Not because I had become rich, not because I had bought $1 million house, because after everything they had done, after everything they had said, after every time they made me feel small enough to disappear, I was finally standing in front of them as proof that I had been enough all along. And they had no idea how much of their own downfall had started with a daughter they called a failure. 10 years earlier, my parents still believed the world revolved around Evan. He was the golden boy, the charming one, the one who could smile at a teacher, a coach, a banker, or a stranger at a gas station and make them feel like they had known him forever. He had the kind of loud confidence that people mistake for talent when they want to believe in him badly enough. Me? I was the quiet one. The one who liked sketching house layouts in the margins of notebooks. The one who spent more time with books than people. The one who asked too many questions and didn't smile enough in family photos. According to my mother, I was moody. According to my father, I was hard to read. According to Evan, I was always trying to make myself special. The truth was that I just never fit their picture. My parents had built their entire identity around appearances. They loved a polished story, a shiny family, a son who looked successful, a daughter who stayed useful but never inconvenient. Evan fit the role perfectly, or at least he did when they were looking at him. He played football in high school, then business in college, then entrepreneur after that, which was a fancy way of saying he spent money faster than he made it and always had a new explanation for why the last thing failed. My mother forgave him every time. My father funded him every time. Me, they funded only when there was something in it for them. I was 17 when the first crack showed. I had won a scholarship to study design at a state college 3 hours away. It was not a full ride, but it was close enough to matter. I remember running into the kitchen with the award letter shaking in my hand, my heart pounding so hard I could barely speak. "I got it," I said. "I got the scholarship." My mother looked up from the stove. "For what?" "Design school." She frowned. "What kind of design?" "Interior design. Space planning. Architecture support, that kind of work." My father, who had been sitting at the table reading the paper, lowered it and gave me that same tired look he used whenever I talked about anything that did not sound practical enough for him. "So you're going to draw pretty rooms for rich people," he said. I blinked. "That is not what it is." "It's exactly what it is," he said. "You'll spend 4 years learning how to decorate other people's houses." I stared at him. "It's not decoration, it's real work." My mother turned off the stove and crossed her arms. "Mia, be honest. How many people do you know who live off that?" "It's a career," I said, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. She sighed the way she always did when she was about to make me feel ridiculous. "We're proud of you, honey, but maybe think about something with better stability." Evan walked in halfway through the conversation, heard enough to understand what was happening, and grinned. "What is she doing now?" he asked. "Scholarship," my mother said flatly. He dropped into a chair and whistled. "Wow. So the family does have a genius after all." I remember clenching my fists under the table. He laughed at my face. "Relax. I'm kidding." He wasn't. Nothing about him ever was. The next year, I found out what my father really thought of my future. He had gotten Evan into trouble with a business loan, and suddenly the family savings were gone. My mother said we had to tighten our belts. My father said there was no money for my first semester housing. Then he said there was no money for the full tuition gap. Then one night, after I had already arranged my dorm deposit and bought my books and told my friends I was leaving, he sat me down and asked me to defer. "Just 1 year," he said. "Help your mother here. Work. Save money. You can still go later." I had looked at him with the kind of hope only young people can have. "Are you sure?" He nodded with fake concern. "We just need everyone to pull their weight for a little while." I believed him. That was the stupidest thing I did back then. Because 3 weeks later, I overheard my mother on the phone telling my aunt that the real reason I wasn't going was because Mia's type of dream is the kind you outgrow when life gets serious. My aunt had gone quiet on the other end. My mother had laughed. "She'll be fine." She's always been a little dramatic. That was when I learned the truth. It wasn't that they couldn't afford school. They had chosen Evan. They had chosen his latest opportunity, a laughably bad attempt at starting a sports equipment company with a guy he met at a bar. They had poured money into that, then into the car he insisted he needed for client meetings, then into a condo he rented with 3 friends and called an investment in image. Every dollar they had scraped together went to him because they had decided he was the one who might actually become something. I was the daughter who could wait. So I did what girls like me always do when nobody is planning a future for them. I built one myself. I took a job at a family-run restaurant on the edge of town. I worked mornings before class at the community college, then nights after closing. I slept in 4-hour chunks. I learned how to stretch tips, how to listen to people when they were distracted, how to tell who owned a building just by the way they looked at the siding. One of the regulars was a retired property manager named Mrs. Delaney, who used to sit in my section every Tuesday with black coffee and a folder of notes. One night I asked her why she kept such careful records on every apartment complex in town. She smiled and said, "Because buildings are only as smart as the people who pay attention to them." That line never left me. A few months later, when the restaurant was slow and I was the only one on shift, she sat me down and asked me questions I had never heard from my own family. What kind of neighborhoods did I notice? Why did some houses sell faster than others? What made one place feel safe and another feel tired? I answered as honestly as I could, and when I finished, she nodded like she had already known what kind of person I was. "You have an eye," she said. "You should use it." I laughed because I thought she was being nice. She wasn't. Mrs. Delaney ended up being the first person who gave me something my family never had: a chance. She hired me part-time at her small property management office. I filed paperwork. I learned leasing rules. I sat in on maintenance calls. I studied late into the night and got my license. I watched how money moved from one hand to another in real estate, and how people with wealth rarely treated it like luck. They treated it like a system, a pattern, a machine. My grandmother, Irene, understood that better than anyone in my family. She was my father's mother, which meant she was the only one in that house who could look at him and see through him. She had worked as a seamstress for years, saved everything she could, and never once apologized for not having the kind of money my mother liked to pretend mattered most. She loved me in a way that made my chest hurt. She noticed when I was missing from the dinner table before anyone else did. She saved old fabrics for me to draw on. She told me the truth when everyone else was feeding me lies. One afternoon, when I was 19 and crying in her kitchen because my mother had called me the family's expensive mistake, Grandma Irene slid a yellow envelope across the table. "What's this?" I asked. "Open it." Inside was a savings bond and a letter. Not much money. Not enough to live on, but enough to make a start. I looked up at her, stunned. "Grandma, I can't take this." "You can," she said. "And you will." My throat tightened. "Why?" She leaned back in her chair and folded her hands. "Because I know what it is to be overlooked. And because your parents are too busy admiring the wrong child to notice the one with the real backbone." I laughed through tears, and she reached over and tapped my hand. "Listen to me, Mia. You are not a failure. You are just not performing for the people who need you to be small." That sentence stayed in me longer than anything my parents ever said. I used that money to pay for my license renewal, my transportation, and my first tiny investment in a rundown duplex nobody wanted. It needed everything repaired, and I had almost nothing left after the down payment. But I was young and stubborn, and for the first time in my life, I had something that belonged to me. I lived in one unit and rented the other. Then I did it again and again. I learned how to spot a deal before it became one. I learned how to fix a budget without fixing myself around other people's cruelty. I learned that a person could be called lucky by people who had no idea how many nights they had survived on coffee and hope and the fear of failure. Meanwhile, Evan kept failing upward. My parents kept praising him. He started one business, then another. Every idea was revolutionary until it needed discipline. Every plan was brilliant until it needed paperwork. Every disaster was someone else's fault. My father kept bailing him out. My mother kept calling it support. They made excuses for him the way people make excuses for a sinking boat, because they are too attached to admit it is going under. When I turned 23, Evan came home one night with an expensive watch and a grin too confident to trust. "I've got a real opportunity," he announced at dinner. My father immediately sat up. "What kind of opportunity?" "A distribution company," Evan said. "I've got a partner. It's a logistics startup, but the margins are insane." My mother looked thrilled. "That sounds amazing." "It is amazing," he said. "We just need some seed money." My father glanced at my mother, then at me, then back at Evan. "How much?" 75 grand. The room went silent. I actually laughed because I thought he was joking. He wasn't. My mother pressed her lips together. "That's a lot." "Not really," Evan said. "Not for something this big." I set my fork down carefully. "What happened to the last business?" He gave me an irritated smile. "It's not dead. It's in a holding pattern." "It's dead," I said. My father's eyes narrowed. "Watch your mouth." I ignored him. "And what exactly makes you think this time is different?" Evan leaned back in his chair. Because this time, I know what I'm doing. I looked at my mother. Do you actually believe that? She had the decency to look uncertain for half a second. Then she straightened. He has vision. I stared at her, unable to believe what I was hearing. Vision? I repeated. He still owes money from the last idea. My father slammed his hand down on the table. Enough. No, not enough, I said, my voice shaking now. You've poured money into him for years. Years. I had to work while he got car payments and bailouts and praise for breathing. I got told to be grateful for scraps. Evan rolled his eyes. Here we go. You don't get to here we go me, I snapped. You've had every chance, every shortcut, every safety net, and you still act like the world owes you an apology. My mother stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor. How dare you talk to your brother like that? How dare you? I shot back. Keep calling him a success when he can't even keep a promise long enough to be embarrassed by it. The room went cold. My father pointed at the door. Go to your room. I laughed again, but this time there was no humor in it. I'm 23, Dad. Then act like it, he said. You're jealous. That word hit harder than the yelling. Jealous. Not hurt. Not frustrated. Not exhausted. Jealous. As if wanting fairness from them was just a petty flaw. As if I had not spent years asking them to see me. I grabbed my bag. Fine, my mother called after me. Mia, don't walk away from this family. I stopped at the doorway and turned back. I'm not walking away. I've been standing outside it for years. That was the last full conversation I had with them for almost 2 years. After that, the messages came through relatives. First questions. Then accusations. Then guilt. Your father is hurt. Your mother says you've changed. Your brother needs help. Family is family. That one always came from people who had never been asked to be the convenient one. I kept building. I bought a small 4-unit building in a neighborhood nobody wanted to invest in, fixed it up, and turned it into clean, safe apartments for working families. A contractor I hired on the second building liked the way I handled problems and introduced me to his old mentor, a woman named Patrice who owned a handful of properties and had a mind for numbers sharper than anything I'd ever seen. She became the second person to really teach me the game. Patrice did not care about my past. She cared about my projections. She did not care how my family treated me. She cared about whether my rehab costs were realistic. And when I told her I wanted to grow, she said, "Then stop thinking like someone trying to prove herself. Think like someone building an empire." I did. I stopped taking jobs that made other people rich before they made me stable. I stopped apologizing for ambition. I stopped shrinking. By 28, I had a portfolio. Not a flashy one, not the kind people brag about on social media with rented cars and fake confidence, but a real one. Small apartment buildings, duplexes, a few single-family homes, cash flow, equity, a private investor who trusted me enough to back my next move. That was when I started a company, Carter Ridge Property Group. The name was mine, not my father's, not my mother's, not Evan's, mine. I remember signing the incorporation papers in a tiny office with a cheap lamp on the desk and feeling my hands tremble afterward because I knew something in my life had quietly, permanently changed. I had become the woman my family always said I would never be. And they still didn't know. Not really. They knew I worked in real estate. They had heard rumors. They knew I had some properties. But to them, that meant I was probably living in some modest condo, barely keeping my head above water. Still not enough to matter in the world they had assigned me to. They never asked, which was fine. I had spent too many years trying to explain myself to people who preferred the lie. The last time I saw my grandmother alive, she held my hand so tightly I thought her fingers might break. "You're glowing," she whispered. I smiled and kissed her forehead. "I'm tired, Grandma. That's not glowing." She gave a weak laugh. "Same thing. Sometimes." My mother hovered in the doorway, pretending she was there to help but really watching for signs she could report later. Evan never came. He was busy. He was always busy. My father came once, stood at the bedside, and said the sort of awkward thing men like him say when tenderness makes them uncomfortable. "You did all right for yourself," he muttered. "Not I'm proud of you. Not, I'm sorry. Just that. You did all right for yourself. My grandmother squeezed my hand. She knew exactly how little it meant. After she passed, the family gathered for the reading of her small estate. My parents assumed there would be nothing worth discussing. My brother assumed he deserved whatever there was. My mother assumed I wouldn't be mentioned unless it was to be corrected. Then the lawyer opened the envelope Grandma had sealed before she died. She had left me her savings, a worn-out set of shares from an old utility company, and a letter. My father's eyebrows shot up. My mother's face went stiff. Evan let out a low laugh like he was waiting for the punchline. The lawyer read the letter aloud. To Mia, it said, if they try to make you feel small again, remember that size is not the same as strength. I am leaving this to you because you will know what to do with it, and because I have watched the rest of them mistake noise for worth. Do not waste your life begging for a room at someone else's table. Build your own house, then decide who gets to sit in it. My eyes burned as I listened. My mother looked offended, as if Grandma had done this from spite. My father did not say a word. Evan shrugged. Well, that's dramatic. I laughed bitterly. Of course you think so. The lawyer handed me the papers, and after that I kept my face still until the meeting ended. But inside, I was changing again. The inheritance was not huge. Not by the standards of the world my parents admired. It wasn't some generational fortune, but it was enough to scale, enough to buy, enough to leverage, enough to remind me that someone in that family had seen me clearly before she died. I used it wisely. I expanded. I refinanced. I partnered. I learned how to speak to lenders without sounding desperate. I learned how to say no to deals that looked shiny but smelled rotten. I learned that the people who make real money often do it by being calm while everyone else panics. And then, 10 years after I left that house for the last time, the email arrived. Subject line: Distress Sale Opportunity. Most of my deals came through different channels by then, but I still checked every alert myself. I opened the listing, read the address, and froze. It was my childhood home. The brick columns, the black shutters, the long stone walkway my mother used to pressure wash every spring. The backyard where Evan had once broken a window with a football and blamed me for it. The kitchen where I had stood with tears in my eyes and been told I was overreacting 1,000 times. At first I thought it had to be another house on the same street. Then I clicked the photos. Same fireplace. Same staircase. Same cracked tile near the pantry door that my father had promised to fix for 6 years and never did. I stared at the screen until my chest felt tight. The home had gone into distress after my father borrowed against it more than once to cover Evan's messes. It wasn't supposed to happen, of course. Families like mine always think a house is a permanent thing. They confuse ownership with safety. They think if the walls are standing, the life inside them can be patched forever. But debts do not care about pride. The numbers told the story my parents had refused to read. Their payments were late, then missed. Then the bank moved. Then the house was listed. A normal investor would have passed it by because of the location and the sentimental risk. I did not pass it by. I bought it through an LLC. Not because I was planning some grand revenge plot. That would be a lie. The truth is more complicated. I bought it because I was good at what I did. Because the deal made sense. Because I did not want strangers gutting a place that still had the bones of my childhood in it. And because somewhere deep inside me, a part of me wanted to look at that address one more time and decide for myself what it meant. Only after the closing did I tell my attorney the truth. That was my house. That was my family's house. The woman they had belittled for 10 years was now the legal owner of the property they still thought belonged to them. My attorney looked at me carefully. Do you want me to tell them? I shook my head. No, not yet. I wanted to see it. I wanted to know whether they would call the bank, the agent, the lawyer, anybody but me. I wanted to know whether pride would make them stupid all the way to the end. It did. For 3 weeks, they got notices in the mail and ignored them. Then the calls started. Then the final warning. Then the date. And finally, on a humid morning in August, I drove up in a clean black SUV with my name on the documents and the truth in my bag. That was the day the driveway went silent. My mother was the first one to crack. She picked up the papers from the pavement with hands that were suddenly clumsy. Mia, she said. And now there was a kind of pleading in her voice I had never heard from her before. This is not funny. I'm not trying to be funny. She shook her head. You can't own this house. I do. How? She whispered. Because I worked for it. Her face crumpled for just a second, and I saw something in her expression I had waited years to see. Fear. Not of me exactly. Of what she had done. My father stepped between us. You bought our house? I bought the house you stopped paying for. That's not the same thing. It's exactly the same thing. Evan finally stopped pacing. He looked at me with a strange, sharp expression. The kind people wear when they're trying to decide whether to hate you or negotiate with you. What are you playing at? He asked. I smiled politely. I'm not playing at anything. He folded his arms. So what? This is revenge. That word hung in the air. Revenge. They wanted it to be that. It was easier if it was that. Then they could dismiss everything that came before as bitterness. Then they could say I had done this because I was angry, not because I had earned it, but that would have been too simple. I took a breath. No, I said. This is ownership. My father's jaw clenched. You could have called. I did. Years ago. You never answered me unless you needed something. My mother swallowed hard. We didn't know you were doing this well. There it was. The lie inside the apology. They still couldn't say they were wrong. They could only say they did not know I mattered. I laughed softly. That's the point, isn't it? You never looked. The front door opened behind them, and the real estate agent from the bank stepped out with a clipboard, doing that polite professional smile people use when they know something terrible is happening, but they have to keep their voice even. Miss Carter? She asked me. My mother turned around so quickly she nearly lost her balance. Miss Carter. The sound of it seemed to hit her harder than the papers had. The agent glanced at the family, then back at me. I'm ready when you are for the walkthrough. My father stared at me. You're serious? Yes. You're really going to take the house. I looked around at the porch my mother had always treated like a throne room. The windows she polished for visitors. The yard my father used to call proof that he had made it. And I felt an odd calm settle over me. I already did. My mother put a hand to her chest. But where are we supposed to go? The question was so familiar, so self-centered, so immediate, that for 1 second I almost remembered being a child and asking where I was supposed to go whenever they had decided I was the one who could move aside. I held her gaze. Somewhere you can afford. That was not a cruel answer. It was a true one. She flinched as if I had slapped her. My father looked away. Evan's face reddened. You're unbelievable. Am I? I asked. Because from where I'm standing, the family that called me a failure is now asking that failure for a favor. He took a step toward me, pointing a finger. You don't get to act like some victim because you worked a few years and got lucky. I stared at him. That boy, even now, still could not help himself. Even now, faced with the wreckage of his own life, he wanted to make my success into an accident. You still haven't learned, I said quietly. He frowned. Learned what? That luck runs out. Character doesn't. His face twisted. You always were the same. Always dramatic. Always making everything a story about you. I almost laughed. Everything about this had always been about them. Who got the praise? Who got the money? Who got forgiven? Who got punished? But I wasn't going to argue that point with a man who had never once examined his own reflection honestly. So I reached into my bag, pulled out another set of papers, and handed them to my father. He took them automatically, then frowned when he saw the details. Lease terms, move-out notice, a relocation offer. His eyes lifted to mine. I'm not heartless, I said. You have 30 days. I'm giving you time to find somewhere else. I'm also covering the cost of a moving truck and the first month's deposit on a smaller place, because I'm not interested in watching you sleep in your car. But after that, this house is mine. My mother stared at the pages as though they had personally betrayed her. You would really put us out? I'm not putting you out. I'm closing a chapter you opened a long time ago. Her mouth trembled. We're your parents. No, I said, and my voice was calm now, which made it somehow harder. You were the people who raised me. That is not the same thing. Silence. A heavy, awful silence. Then my father, who had spent my childhood speaking to me as if every word he uttered was a favor, said the one sentence I think he had never thought he would ever have to say to me. I was wrong. I looked at him. It was the first honest thing he had said to me in years, maybe ever. His shoulders sagged a little, like the act of saying it had cost him something real. He looked older suddenly, smaller, not weaker exactly, but stripped of the false authority he had leaned on for so long. My mother turned toward him. Mark. He ignored her and kept looking at me. You were not a failure, he said, his voice rough. I just. He stopped, and for a second I thought he might not finish. Then he said, I just wanted one of my children to succeed in a way the world could see. I let that sit there. It was not enough. It would never be enough. But it was honest. And honesty, after years of lies, can feel almost sacred. I nodded once. You chose visibility over value. He closed his eyes. My mother looked between us and started crying. Quietly at first, then harder. We only wanted the best for everyone. No, I said. You wanted the best. Looking story. Evan scoffed, but the sound was weak now, hollowed out by embarrassment. So what? You did all this just to humiliate us? I turned to face him fully. No. I did this because I built a life without you in it. The humiliation is just what happens when reality catches up. He had nothing to say to that. Neither did my mother. My father looked at the house behind him, then back at me, and I saw the exact moment he understood the part he could no longer escape. He had lost the daughter who once would have done anything to earn his approval, and she had become the woman who no longer needed it. The walkthrough was quick and cold. The agent checked the rooms while my family stood in the foyer like ghosts trapped in their own memory. There was still furniture in place, still old family photos hanging on the walls, still the vase my mother had bought on vacation and called elegant, because it cost too much for her to admit she liked it too much. I walked through my old bedroom last. The wallpaper had changed years ago, but the closet still had the same scar where I had slammed the door in anger as a teenager. The window still looked out at the backyard tree where I used to sit and read when the house got too loud. I stood there for a long time. I had not come back for nostalgia, but nostalgia came anyway, uninvited. I remembered the nights I had spent in that room staring at the ceiling, promising myself I would build a life so solid nobody could knock it down with words. I remembered my grandmother's hand on mine. I remembered my mother saying I was too sensitive. I remembered my father saying I was dramatic. I remembered Evan calling me the funeral mood because I did not laugh at his jokes. I remembered every time the house had felt less like a home and more like a stage where I was expected to play a role I did not want. Then I heard my mother behind me. Mia? I turned. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her, and for the first time in my life, I could see not just the woman who had criticized me, but the woman who had been trapped in her own need to maintain appearances. That did not erase what she had done. It didn't excuse it, but it made the hurt more complicated. I'm sorry, she said. The words were fragile, almost childlike. I believed she meant them in the only way she could at that moment. But apologies are not magic. They do not rewind time. They do not restore school years, or college dreams, or birthdays spent feeling unwanted, or all the little humiliations that accumulate into a person's sense of self. So I said the only honest thing I could say back. I know. She nodded slowly, tears still on her face. Then, after a long pause, she asked the question I knew had been sitting behind all the others. Did you hate us? That was the one that almost broke me. Because hate is loud. Hate is active. Hate is a fire you can point to. What I had felt for years was not hate. It was grief. I had grieved the parents I thought I had, the family I thought I belonged to, the version of the future where they might have finally seen me and realized I had been there all along. So I shook my head. No, I said. I hated what you made me feel like. She covered her mouth and cried harder. Evan stormed out. My father stayed, leaning heavily against the wall as if the whole house had become too much for him to carry. For a moment I thought he might say something else, something better, something that could maybe begin the work of repair. Instead, he looked at me and asked, in a voice stripped of everything but helplessness, "Are you happy?" The question surprised me so much I actually thought about it, and the answer was not simple. I was not happy because they were hurting. I was not happy because I had money. I was not happy because the house was mine. But I was at peace in a way I had never been when I was trying to earn a place in their version of life. "I'm free," I said finally. "That's close enough for now." He nodded once, and to his credit, he did not argue. They moved out 3 weeks later. Evan tried to fight it at first. He called lawyers. He called relatives. He sent me a furious message accusing me of betrayal, greed, and cruelty, which was almost impressive coming from a man who had spent a decade feeding off everyone around him. I forwarded the message to my attorney and blocked him. My mother called twice after that, first to ask if there was any way to extend the move-out date, then to ask if I would at least let her take the dining set because it had been a wedding gift from my grandmother. I said yes to that one. It seemed only right. My father called once, late at night, and I almost didn't answer. When I did, he said something I will never forget. "You were never a failure," he told me. "I see that now." I closed my eyes. Then he added, "I was too proud to see it before." That one landed harder than the apology. Not because it fixed anything, but because it was real. After they left, I stood alone in the house for a long time. The rooms were empty but not hollow. That is the best way I can describe it. The house no longer felt like an accusation. It felt like a place that had finally stopped speaking in someone else's voice. I did not move back in. I considered it for a week, then decided against it. Too many ghosts. Too many old reactions sitting in the corners waiting to be triggered. Instead, I renovated it. Not into the same polished, showy version my mother had loved, but into something honest and beautiful. I kept the staircase. I kept the fireplace. I replaced the kitchen with a warmer, more functional space. I turned the old formal dining room into a meeting room for the nonprofit housing outreach program I later funded through my company. I kept one wall in the hallway bare on purpose because I liked the space better that way. In the end, the house became something my family never knew how to build. A place that worked. A place where people were not valued for how shiny they looked. A place where no one had to pretend to be more important than they were just to be tolerated. A year later, my mother invited me to coffee. Not in the house. Not in some dramatic reunion. Just coffee in a small place across town. I went. She looked nervous when I arrived, and I understood why. She was trying to figure out whether she was still my mother in any meaningful way. I was trying to figure out whether I still had room in my life for her at all. She thanked me for the moving help. She told me they had rented a modest condo near the hospital where she now volunteered part-time. She said my father was working as an estimator for a contractor and seemed, in her words, humbled in a way that is good for him. I nearly smiled at that. She looked down at her cup. "Evan left town," she said quietly. "He's living with a friend in another state." "That sounds like him," she nodded. "He's not doing well." I did not ask for details. She knew I wouldn't. After a long silence, she said, "I think I spent years loving the version of my life I could describe to other people. I didn't know how to love the people in front of me properly." I listened. Then I said, "I needed you to know me when I was still reachable." Her eyes filled again. "I know." And for the first time, I believed she did. That didn't make everything okay. It didn't heal all of it. But it was a beginning of a kind I never thought I would get. My father never became warm and easy. He was not transformed into a wise, soft-spoken man who suddenly understood emotional language. Real people are rarely rewritten that neatly. But he did start calling without needing a reason. He did ask about my work. He did mention, awkwardly and with visible discomfort, that he had seen a news article about one of my development projects and told a neighbor, "That's my daughter." I think he was proud in the only way he knew how to be, and that mattered more than I expected. As for Evan, I heard through relatives that he tried to start over in 3 different cities and failed in all 3. He was good at being the center of attention. He was not good at accountability. That tends to catch up with people eventually. I do not wish him harm. I just no longer confuse his problems with my responsibility. The house, meanwhile, became one of my favorite properties in the portfolio because it taught me something no trophy building ever could. It taught me that victory is not always loud. Sometimes victory looks like a set of keys in a woman's hand, while the people who dismissed her stand on the other side of the door, unable to understand how the world shifted without asking permission. Sometimes victory is walking through the rooms where you were once made to feel lesser and realizing those rooms no longer own your memory. Sometimes victory is being able to answer cruelty with boundaries instead of pleading. And sometimes, if life is feeling particularly honest, victory is watching the people who made you feel invisible finally have to look you in the eye and admit that you existed all along. I think about Grandma Irene most when I'm in that house. She was the first person who told me not to beg for a seat. She was the first person who saw that my silence was not weakness.